Hi, so welcome to the engine assembly video for my Ford Model T. So this has been a long time coming, really. It took me a long time to get everything together, and even longer to find some time to sit down and make a video. As it happens, I'm out here on a little excursion testing the boat, and I've got some time to edit some videos, so here we are. Hopefully this will be of use to you, and hopefully if you're rebuilding a Ford Model T or thinking of doing one, might give you some ideas, don't know. But hopefully it's all good, and if it is, please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks very much.
So this video's been a long time in the making, really. I originally bought the Ford as a fairly sort of wrecked lump of scrap steel just before the COVID lockdowns all started. It took me a few months to get her into a position where she'd actually sort of drive on the road, and then unfortunately I dropped something in the gearbox. I realised I'd had to take the hog's head off, and when I looked in there I found that in actual fact a plate had broken off one of the magnets on the flywheel, which meant it was time to take the engine out and have a good look at it and try and fix it. Then I found that the crankshaft was broken and I had to order a new one, and then I got into this long-winded problems of crankshafts being delivered that were bent and having to straighten them myself, and then trying to find a blimmin' camshaft that was good because my camshaft was too worn. Anyhow, we now get to the video at a point where I've finally got everything together and I can start work. Now the Ford Model T uses white metal Babbitt bearings, so these are poured actually into the block, and to fit them you have to sort of scrape them so that the crankshaft fits into them nicely, and the best way to finish them off is Timesaver. So it took me a long time to use Timesaver, which is this sort of lapping compound that you mix with oil and you rub it backwards and forwards. You assemble the crank up and you crank it backwards and forwards for what feels like hours on end until eventually you get a really good clearance fit. To measure how much clearance you have, you use Plastigauge like this, which is these weird little red rods. You stick them in between the bearing and the surface and clamp it down nice and tight, and it squeezes out, and depending on how much it squeezes out, it will tell you how much clearance you've got in that bearing. Now bearings need clearance so that the oil can get into the bearing space. Too little clearance and you'll get a load of friction and it will burn out or melt the bearing. Too much clearance and you'll start getting knocking and it will wear out very quickly. With Model Ts, when you're using Timesaver, the general consensus is you should aim for a clearance of about 1.5 thou. Then as the bearing ages, it will naturally sort of increase itself to about 2 thou, which is perfectly acceptable. Anyhow, I'm just at the point where I'm Plastigaging this, and my little Plastigauge gauges tell me that I have, oops, that's the wrong side, tell me that I have now about 1.5, slightly less than 1.5 on there, and slightly more than 1.5 on there, but I'm pretty much happy with that. And it's the same on all of these now, so the crank's all fitted to 1.5 thou clearance, as are all the conrod bases, so good to go. On the Ford Model T, both conrods and the crankshaft caps all have those little brass shims in the joint there. And the great thing is as the Babbitt bearings wear a little bit and the clearances start to increase and you might get a knocking, you can undo the bottom of the pan with the engine in the car and just take off those caps and remove a shim to tighten up all the bearings again as just they wear over time. So I've got all the crank in. I have now just been through all of my conrods. They're all weighted, balanced, adjusted. I've put one of the tricks I've done to try and get these all balanced to the same weights is I've used two scales. This one's very accurate and the other one not so much. But what I've done is I've used thin washers or thick washers on some of them to make the bottoms weigh a little bit heavier, and then I haven't had to take so much off the others, and I've just taken the flashing off basically rather than going too far with it. On the tops, these were a lot heavier than my old one and this one that I picked up at a jumble sale. So I'm going to use washers, thick washers underneath the bolts, because when you look at the bolt and it goes in, you can actually fit a couple of washers on there and it's still got full threads to the end. And those washers are like 2 gram each. So I can get about another 4 grams on the tops there quite easily. And it means I didn't have to take off so much off these ones. I'm also fitting these little oil dippers to the bottom of the con rods that will scoop some oil into the bearings. They need a bit of modification. I had to file them down a little bit and take account of them when I was doing all the balancing of the rods. Here I'm polishing up the gudgeon pins that come with the pistons. They're just a little bit too tight, and I've heard of reports where they seize up a little bit and cause the piston to go a little bit cocked in the bore of the engine block, and that causes a lot of scoring. Another thing to note with these modern pistons is they say that you should have a 2.5 thou clearance in the bores, but that is not enough, and a lot of people have ended up at some point in the future suddenly finding that their pistons have actually seized inside the bores and scored. So you should aim for about a 4 thou clearance really when you rebore the cylinders. The con rods are very, very weak, so it's important not to tighten them up by, holding the con rod and then tightening up the top of the bolt there, because you will twist the con rod. Modern pistons come with modern piston rings, so these are quite cool. One thing is they haven't marked them very well, so you can't tell what the top of the piston is. I finally found the little dot that they said they etched in. Really, really difficult to try and find it there. So I'm really doing my best here to put this engine together really, really well, so that it's really so it's as good as I can possibly get it, almost as new. So it's going to really last me for years and years on all those 2-mile journeys that I'm planning to do to the shops. Just note what I've done there. I really messed up here. I put all the pistons in and I lined all the gaps up in the same place without thinking about it. Got them all in and suddenly thought, wait a second. I had to take them all out again and line all the gaps, what's a third of 360? 120 degrees off of each other, so that the gaps weren't all in the same space. Oh, that's the wire locking on the gudgeon pin, the bolt there, the rod top bolt. But a really good place to look is Model T Tips on YouTube. They've done some excellent videos, some truly excellent, bodacious videos there that really help you trying to figure out what you're going to do with your rebuild. Now, when I set out to actually rebuild this car, I did want to do something that was very sort of period. Unfortunately, as you can see, this is some stainless steel, and I seem to have used a lot of stainless steel on the car. But anyhow, this is actually a period modification they came up with sometime in the 20s or 30s to increase the oil supply to the front of the engine. Basically, they welded up they didn't weld up, but they made like a thing that was installed on the side of the hogshead here, that you can see here, and it would take a line from the flywheel area down to the front of the engine to get oil right to the front of the con rods and just help the splash oil system. It's rather a nightmare to sort of do it up because, as you can see here, I have to cut my perfectly good hogshead and I don't really like cutting original parts. But nevertheless, it's going to make such a difference to the general oiling of the engine that it's really worth doing. So the outside oil line. Well, first off, this is not shed by the tracks, so don't expect some fancy animation from me. Anyway, this is the flywheel in the engine, and you've got your oil sump with all the oil in there. As the flywheel spins round, it acts like a sort of water wheel with all these magnets attached around here, and it draws the oil up here and sprays it all around this edge. And with my little oil line that I've welded up and cut into the hogshead, it will get forced down this tube out here and down to the front of the engine where the first number 1 con rod is, and it will oil up that and just help the splash oil system. Now, in actual fact, this creates so much sort of like turbulence in this oil that this spreads oil absolutely everywhere, and it must be quite a sort of moist, oily place to be, that inside of that engine, because literally the oil is just being thrown everywhere by this splash oil system. Now, another issue I want to address is that Model T Fords don't have an oil pump or an oil filter, so you have to do regular oil changes, which just isn't very good. So I'm welding in some extra fittings into the sump to take an oil line out of the sump and run it for a filter and a pump and then run it back into the sump. Now this might end up just being used after the engine is run while it's still warm, but with the engine turned off, just to polish the oil. Or I suppose it might be possible to use it when the engine is running, but I'm not too sure about that. But yeah, it just seems a good idea to add in this extra thing, and it will effectively mean that the engine will be able to run, several, well, probably a couple of thousand miles between oil changes, because the oil will be regularly cleaned. The other part I've done on here is I've welded this bit on here, around here, exactly the same thing. That's a 1/2 inch pipe, 3/8 diameter, and that's the thing that's going to link up to the hogshead and bring oil that's thrown off the flywheel straight down here, straight in here, straight into number 1 rod. And this is a general area. Number 1 rod's about here, and the gear that runs the camshaft about here, so it'll really add lots of oil to this area that then naturally goes down here back into the sump and then gets thrown around and comes back up again. So for the next stage of engine assembly, I have to put the engine on its nose, and the reason for this is because, for one thing, you want the magneto to be as close as it can get to the coil to make sure that you don't get that too close, because if you get it too close and it's spinning around at high speed right next to the coils, you've got all these 16 magnets that can suddenly run into all the coils and strip everything and create a bird's nest of junk in your transmission and a whole engine reassembly job. The other thing is the 4th main. You really want that 4th main to be properly in line with the crankshaft, because if the 4th main is a little bit out, then basically, because the whole thing is like almost a solid assembly, but the transmission sits on a shaft, what happens is you'll get very bad vibration that can actually crack the crankshaft on the 3rd rod bearing, I think it is, or somewhere around there, or the 2nd one. But it can really cause deflection in the transmission, and then you've got big problems. So that's the reason why I've stuck the engine on its end to reassemble it. I made the stand out of a piece of steel rod and a simple sort of cross of steel on the floor, and then 2 of those spark plug things you can put in the spark plug hangers to lift the engine up. Engine hooks that you screw into spark plug holes, and that's how I've kept it on her end properly like that. I've been doing my tightness check on these magnets, and I've got 0.8 of a millimeter. This one's slightly tight at 0.8, which corresponds to just slightly over 31 thou, so 32 thou on the bottom of the ring. Up top, I've got a tight 25 thou, which is 0.63 millimeters. So the clearance given is 25 thou between those magnets and the coils. However, the weight of the transmission hangs down, and basically the transmission supported a little bit by the crankshaft and a little bit by the output shaft, and it hangs down on that output shaft and can pull that flywheel down a little bit. So they say that you should have like a bit more clearance on the bottom to account for that hanging down action, and a little bit, well, the same or slightly less on the top. So that's why I've gone for 25 thou on the top and 32 on the bottom. So to get the end float right, again, Mike Bender on Model T Tips did a really good video about this. But basically you can index the crankshaft, the flywheel and the transmission output shaft in various different combinations. Each one, because there's 2 dowels here, you can locate the shaft that way round or that way round. So each one has 2 possible ways to orientate it. And if you work out, you've got 2 possible ways to do the crankshaft, 2 possible ways to do the flywheel, 2 possible ways to do the output. So you can have 1 on the crankshaft, 1, and you can run through this table, and you've got 8 possible combinations to get that end float measurement into the right sort of tolerance, so that it gets, within that sort of 1 thou that you need, or 2 thou on the output shaft, the end of the output shaft. Another way of affecting this as well, if you still, after doing 8 different combinations, still can't get the end float to within some sort of 2 thou, 1 to 2 thou tolerance, then what it can be is it can be the face on this might be slightly off.
and that was the effect on mine from the factory, so I had to have mine remachined. The Scat Crank, despite them delivering it bent, well, I knew that was accurate, but if you're using an old crankshaft, again, you might find that this face is just a little bit off. It's, you know, it only needs to be a fraction of a thou off, and it will make a big difference to this whole assembly by the time you get to the end of the output shaft. And now I've got to do this run out check on this shaft, and I believe it might be good. So let's see. Okay, so we're on 93. Coming back up to 94. Back down to 93. Back up to 94. So yeah, we got 1 thou of run out on that shaft, which is pretty good. That's certainly good enough for this. I think people say if you've got 2, it's good. So you've got around about 1 thou. The next thing is to put the transmission shaft on, and I've got the drum already mounted. So I'll stick that on, just make sure that's okay, and then I have to take the transmission apart and assemble it all. Right, so now I've put the transmission shaft on, so it's all on its bearings. Incidentally, with the transmission shaft, I changed the driven plate bush, knocked it out, put my end cap back in, drove in the new bush carefully, and I found it almost slotted on the transmission shaft, so I used Timesaver to lap it into the shaft in place. Several people say you have to line it up on a lathe and ream it out on a lathe. I ain't got a lathe and I haven't got a reamer, so I just used Timesaver. By tapping the bush in, I didn't really distort it at all, and it meant it could get on the shaft and it was a bit tight, but with Timesaver then it loosened up and now it's really nice and loose. So here's the run out measurement on this one. So this is the final for the 4th main. We're 1 thou under 10, so we've gone up to 1.5. Now we're going down to -1.
What's that?
I suppose you could say that's 3 thou. So I reckon that's pretty good. So I've measured it without the camera in my hand, and yeah, I've got a maximum of about 3.5 thou run out on that end. Now bearing in mind people say up to 6 is acceptable, 6 is good enough. I'm quite happy with that. I think we've got that quite sweet. So the flywheel nuts that are up there, that you probably can't see because it's too dark and I can't get my light, you don't have much clearance. So what I found is I bought this, where's the camera gone? There you go. I bought this 1/2 inch beam torque wrench because it's a lot narrower at the head. So I can just get it between the 3rd main bearing cap and the crankshaft and the flywheel. That's 11/16 multi-point socket 1/2 inch, and it fits on that, on the flywheel nuts quite nicely. At this point you might be thinking, what a long-winded process. Well, welcome to the world of vintage engine rebuilding. I thought this was going to be easy and fun, and instead it was 2 years of learning arcane terms like Babbitt bearings and how to scrape them out like that, and using Timesaver, or looking for parts that, you know, haven't been made by an official manufacturer for 80 years or 100 years. You know, a lot of it's been 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. You know, it turns out that one of the simplest cars you could build was actually quite difficult. But the thing is to always focus on that end goal, that end time when you're driving down the road in something that you've built and you've worked on, and that hopefully will make it all worthwhile. So here we are at the 4th main. I can't remember what the last video I did or anything, but I left this over a month ago just before I went on holiday, and I wasn't happy with it. Anyway, I used Sikaflex 221 round here and silicone round here because I might need to take the hogshead off at some point, and Sikaflex 221 is really, really difficult to undo. So this is Sikaflex 221. It's a polyurethane. It is a very strong sealant. I've used it for years, and the biggest, you know, it's great. The only problem with it is getting it apart again if you need to. So anyhow, I took this apart again because I wasn't happy with it. Basically, I was getting my feeler gauge. It's absolutely straight to the shaft. You know, the bolt holes lined up. I've got everything perfect. Poop. So why I wasn't happy though is I realised that I had more gap one side than the other side. That was not because this was out of a line, because I had this perfect. It literally dropped in perfectly in line with these holes. It was because the flange here wasn't straight. So this flange was a little bit lower. So it's being pulled down like this. So what I've done is I tried shimming it while I did it. It didn't work. I've taken it all apart, which is a nightmare with the Sikaflex, but never mind. And now I've put shims in. So I've got a 20 thou shim here, something like about 18 thou here. And I believe I've got it perfect now. So not only has it slotted straight in place, nice and centrally on the shaft, but also this angle here is good. And the way I can check that is by just putting my feeler gauge in around that. And I've got equal, it goes down an equal distance. It's only a 0.05 millimeter, but it goes down equal distance on all. Whereas when I first did it, I could slot it in like a good sort of centimetre on one side. So I've tightened it up very carefully, gone round tightening the bolts, and I think I've got it equal. So I'm happy with that now. It's really worth getting that fourth main really good, because yeah, the fourth main, if it isn't really good, then you'll have what I had, which was you've got a big crankshaft down here, big flywheel, big transmission, and if the fourth main's not holding it, the whole lot can just rock backwards and forwards, make loads of noise, and then snap the crankshaft or crack it. So it's really worth putting a lot of effort in here, and I have put a lot of effort in. So the reason for using Sikaflex 221 is because I'm going to fit this into the car in 2 days time, and when I do, once it's just about in place, ready to be lined up with the axle there that's already greased and covered in wrap to protect it and preserve it. Once it's lined up, I've got to take these bolts out, which means then this is all loose again. So I don't want it moving. So the Sikaflex will very definitely hold it glued in place. It will not move. Sikaflex is astonishing stuff. It's come the day to put the engine in. So here's the engine crane already. There's the engine. I've got loads of these nice fancy brand new bolts because the old ones are stretched. I'm going to have to grind the grading marks off of them though, so it looks original. I'll do it when I put the head on. I haven't put the head or the valves in yet, or the camshaft. And there's the space it's going in already. This should be fun.
So I was really happy to finally be at this point and have this engine going in. It had been just such a huge sort of nightmare trying to solve crankshafts and all the various little problems I'd had, such as getting the bores home to the correct dimensions and everything like that. To finally have this engine going in was just really, it was a really pivotal moment for me. However, I still had one big problem remaining, and that was my camshaft was very, very worn. It just happened to be that time in the aftermath of COVID where a lot of the skilled people who had left the market had gone and got better jobs or retired early. So to try and find a camshaft was really, really difficult. Luckily, Chaffins over in America just had a batch of camshafts reground. So I managed to get in on that first batch and get one sent over to me, but it hadn't arrived at this time. So I was going to have to fit it after the engine had gone in. So I've got to try and sort this out now, and I've got to try and fit all my lifters in, put clothes pegs on them to hold them in place, and then hopefully I can slide my camshaft in, lift her up, slide the camshaft in, then I've got a couple of little rubber pads to put underneath there that I'm going to use, and then hopefully the engine will be in at last, fully, properly done. Oh, if you go for the Ford Model A rope seal, remember you need two. You would think, if you buy a rope seal for a crankshaft, they would provide you with the rope seal for the crankshaft. But apparently it comes in packs, and there's one for the top and one for the bottom. Why? So this is this seal going in, like this. So I've had it soaking in oil for a very long time now, because I thought I was ready to stick this in, and then I found I wasn't. So I'm just selecting a socket that sort of fits in there a bit. Actually, I should go and find one that matches the crankshaft in a second. But yeah, it's quite a tight fit, so I'll just cut it off here when I'm done. And if you're wondering why I'm not using a neoprene seal on the front of the crankshaft, I am. I just looked at it and I didn't like the way the neoprene seal fits in here, and use silica and all that sort of stuff. And I thought, if it goes wrong, how do you get it out again? And I thought, I'm not going for all that. Whereas this won't really go wrong. But what I'm going to do, because these do leak, is once it's all in place, I'm going to glue the neoprene seal on the surface there, and it will just stop that last bit of weeping. Again, I use Sikaflex. Apparently lots of people do it this way, but I'm going to use Sikaflex so it won't come off. But the big thing is then you've got the original seal that sort of helps, and then you've got the neoprene seal as well. And yeah, it should be good. That's my logic anyway. So I got this bit of old aluminium from the boat, and I'm just doing it like this, trying not to cut my finger. Anyhow, I'll carry on doing this, and then that should hopefully be ready to fit. Right, so fitting the Scat crank. Luckily I checked this and tried to turn the engine over before I bolted this in. Otherwise there'd have been a lot of swearing this afternoon. But the Scat crank, it hits the sump base here. So I've ground it down already a lot. I'm just going to TIG this up here and then ground it down a bit more. I mean, I prefer the other option that people do, like Mike Bender, where they put a bolt here and a bolt here, but I can't do that because I didn't know this was going to be an issue, and the engine's in the car, and yeah. Anyhow, this is the other option. I just weld up that and then grind it back a bit. Yeah, because I'm a butcher, apparently. I have no craftsman skills. That's what I've just been told on a forum. Great, isn't it? I love forums. They're supposed to be there to be generous and help you with your hobby, and people of like minds, and it ends up being like some kind of crazy divided place where people will go to hell in a handbasket to call you how bloody terrible, call you out and how terrible you are. I got a nice new reground camshaft, and guess what I just found? Now, alright, a lot of people will know this already. When you put a reground camshaft in, basically, because it's reground, the lifters don't come up so high, which means the valve stems are too short. So I've got massive gaps here. So the problem I've come across at this point is my original camshaft, which is here, was too worn on the lobes to actually use. And what that meant is as the cam was turning around, it wouldn't lift the valve high enough. And that would mean that, for one thing, the valve would be not opening long enough to make a proper amount of power out the car. But also, it wouldn't open enough, you know, really to let that air fuel mixture in or let the exhaust out to a sufficient quantity. So basically the power of the engine would have been quite badly reduced. So I had to get a reground cam. The problem with regrinding cams, of course, is that you can't just regrind the lobe on the camshaft. To get that lift difference between the valve being all the way up and the valve being all the way down, you know, to get that correct difference, when they regrind the crank, they have to regrind the lobe and the whole back part of the lobe as well. So that means that overall the cam here is actually slightly smaller than it was before, which means now you're not getting quite the same amount of lift out the valve. So your valve stem is basically a little bit too short. The way you can get round this is by fitting adjustable lifters, or if you could find them, valves with longer stems.
So yeah, that's the problem I've come across. So I have a choice at this point. Either I go and get adjustable lifters, which is more expense, or I try and come up with another solution, which is what I've done. So I've managed to find some caps that you can put on the end of these to make them slightly longer. And I'm going to order them tomorrow, and then hopefully I can get the valves done, the head back on, and then this thing will be running once again in time for its 100th birthday. The first part of the valve job is to lap in the valves to the top of the engine deck, and what you're trying to do is make a really nice sort of like airtight seal so that when the valve is shut, you know, no mixture can escape out that valve, because obviously your piston is compressing the fuel air mixture and you want to make sure none of it escapes and everything is there to be ignited and produce maximum power, particularly in an engine like the Ford Model T that's only got a compression ratio of something like 4:1, I think it is. I've got an exceptionally old can of valve lapping paste. Looks nice and clean inside though. Geez, I've had this since I was a kid when I first did my Spitfire. Triumph Spitfire, that is, unfortunately not the plane. I was just about to put the compound on the end of my twizzle stick. Never mind. So, you know, what you're looking for is basically what I've got there actually. It's quite nice, this one. But having said that, the people that cut my seats, they didn't cut them very well. So this is already a little bit deep. It's annoying, there's a bit of a ridge there now on brand new valves because, as I say, their lapping tool just seemed to leave grooves and it's been a bit to get it out. Yeah, that's a problem with dealing with other people. You know, obviously their machinery is perhaps not, their tools are perhaps not new, and they've done a half-assed quick job, which is really unhelpful to me. Charge me loads of money, and you end up with that. So lick the end of the twizzle stick. That had a bit of valve compound on it, so that's nice. Doesn't taste very bad. Doesn't taste very good either. So you've got to be careful not to get the valve compound, lapping compound, in the hole there, because if you do that, then you end up eking out the valve guide. So this should be quite good now. Yep, that's a nice finish on there. And then what I do is I stick that down there and I just spray down the hole as well. Make sure that's clean. Once you've got your valves lapped in, the next thing to do is set the clearance gaps down here. And these are set when the engine is cold, and they're really important because as the engine heats up, everything expands, and this long valve stem here will get longer as it gets hotter. And if you had no gap here, then as it would get longer, it would literally mean that the valve would open and stay open, slightly open all the time. And then your fuel air mixture would escape out that valve and you'd have a real big reduction in power. Plus also you'd be at risk of burning out the valve because it would get so hot from all the fuel air or on the exhaust valves, all the exhaust going by all the time and being subjected to the full force of the ignition with no sort of cooling action of being in touch with the head.
To set the clearances, first you have to make sure that the cam lobe is all the way round and the valve or the cam is in the position where the valve will be fully shut.
So let's see where we are. So if I put my lash cap in there and then see if I've got any clearance. The answer is no. One of these. Yeah, I've still got clearance there. So I need to go and take a reasonable amount of this end.
So on an original Ford Model T that's not had some of the newfangled adjustable lifters fitted to it, yes, to adjust the valves you actually have to grind the length of the valve stem down. And the important critical thing to remember is you can always grind a little bit more off, but you can't grind a little bit more on.
So I've got this piece of wood, and basically what I did is I drilled a hole through this with the bench drill to make sure it was exactly straight going through.
I slot my valve in here, and then it brings it onto the grinding disc exactly perpendicular. So basically, and then this is all mounted up, not solid enough but fairly solid. So I've got to do about 6 bursts. Now what you can do is you can use a vernier caliper. It's not exceptionally accurate, but it's probably accurate to within a few bits. Now, I've been doing that a little bit because it's, as I say, it just gives you that slight sort of key. Then I've got my sanding pad here. I run that up obviously so it's spinning, and then you can just, I got this nice and down for the lash cap like this, and you can put a nice edge on this. So back at the engine, I pop this in the oil and I drop it down. Unfortunately I've got millimeter feeler gauges, so this is exhaust, so I want it to be around about 0.014 thou. Now everyone says 0.015, but I wanted to make it a little bit under. I want it to be a tight 0.014 thou. Anyhow, this is 0.3 millimeters, which is 0.012, and that is tight, as in probably too tight. So I will just go and do this again, and then hopefully I'll be in a position to stick it in with the spring. Nice little bit of oil on there and drop it in with the spring. Let's make sure the camera's on and I'm not talking to myself again. Not that anyone watches my videos anyway. I mean, if I were a woman, I'd be able to do this in the nip, and then I'd have thousands of subscribers who would have absolutely no interest whatsoever in Ford Model Ts. But I neither have the gender nor the body for that, so there you go. I don't have a spring compressor, but I do have a block of wood and a spanner, and I found that if you get said block of wood around about here, let's say it's on these, it has to be a little bit closer in than this, and you get it underneath there, underneath the spring, you can, it's a little bit of a fiddle to get it underneath the spring when the spring's in here at first, but you can prise it up and then use a pair of pliers, which are somewhere around there, I can't find them. You can then push the pin in and do everything you need to do, and then let go of it without a spring compressor. Saves a few quid. So we've got the starter motor in. Next job is to put the new outside oil line all the way down here, and the other outside oil line, the standard one that comes from the mag post. The mag post one goes into this little thing here, which I've protected with the cocktail stick. Great thing about a cocktail stick is then once you've finished protecting your thing, you can just stick it in your tea and have tea. Something like that. Anyhow, it's stopping any dirt from going in there at the moment, which is great. Right, so it's come to that time. I've sealed up the sump plugs. So I'm just pouring oil over the, what do you call these things? Kevlar bands, transmission bands. Some people say you should soak them in oil before you put them on. Well, the only problem I had is if I'd have done that, I might have got a load of other dust as I was assembling everything on the engine in there. So other people have said you can stick it in afterwards. Obviously she's going to sit soaked in oil for probably a week and a half or something, or 2 weeks before I actually start her up. So I've put about half of a, what's this, litre? I don't know, pint or something like that in there for now. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick the other half up front to fill up the dips, and then I'll keep on doing that until I've filled her up and my sight gauge is reading there. Just stuck that sight gauge in. My 2 offtakes there for the oiling system, I've sealed them up for now. So I'm going to be running her first, probably for the first 10 miles or something, with no oil pumps or anything like that, because obviously she doesn't need an oil pump. But what I will do is I will look later at getting a little electric oil pump, and I've already got my little filter somewhere over here in my incredibly messy garage.
So this is actually used, it's a kit for a classic motorbike. Nice little Champion filter, nice little filter head there, 3/8 fitting, so it's the same as the oil pump's going to be. And I will stick that somewhere on the frame rail, down there somewhere next to an oil pump, and then you'll be able to turn it on and just polish the oil, they call it. I say they, ships do this and stuff like that. Anyhow, so here's the outside oil line. I've actually got a clear piece of plastic on there just for now, for the first couple of starts. It should be okay actually. I've used that on oil before and that oil line's never gone wrong. But it means I'll be able to see the oil going down. I was tempted to put the oil filter in that line, and actually, because that oil filter's got no spring in it, so it, or has it? Yeah, it's got a spring in it, but I can remove it. I can drill holes in the, I say spring, you know, one-way valve. I can drill holes in them, so it doesn't retain oil, and it is easier to pass the oil. It doesn't have to come a pressure to get it moving. But I'm having to think about it. I mean, apparently there's good flow down there, because obviously if I could stick a oil filter in that line, that would be the perfect solution. Apparently there's enough pressure comes down there for an oil filter.
So at last I can stick some oil in the engine and get it ready for that very first engine start. It's been 2 years at this point since all my problems with flywheel and crankshafts and then camshafts and everything, so I'm really looking forward to this moment of completion.
Well, I hope you found this video enjoyable, interesting, or mildly useful. If you have, please consider liking and subscribing. And if you've got any comments or questions you want to ask about Model Ts, projects, or anything in general, please feel free to leave a comment down below, and I'll do my best to help in whatever way I possibly can. And it is all going to be worth it in the end, believe me, I know. Anyway, so thanks very much for watching and have a great day.
So you give well, he was 10 years old at the time, you give a 10-year-old boy a Dremel so he can engrave and practice engraving stuff on wood, and that's what he engraves. Dearie me.